Okay, the last thing we're going to do here is we're going to add some similar effects to the Google Mondrian project that we did a couple videos ago. Actually, before that, I'm going to make this text a little bit bigger. I'm going to make my list items in here. I'm going to give them a font size of 18 pixels. Or let's go 20 pixels. Just to make them a little bit bigger. Oh, that's on the hover. I don't want that. Excuse me. Let's do it inside this one right here. So now they're a little bit bigger and the navigation pops out a little bit more. Okay, that's nice. I'm also going to give them a padding right of 2 pixels. So that they extend a little bit further and just so they have a nice little bit of room. And there we go. I think my navigation looks all right. I give it a padding right of 2 pixels. So there's a little bit of space on the right. Also, they're not bumping it directly up to the sides of this wall. If you really want, you can just say padding 5 pixels and then get rid of all these other ones and it'll have a 5 pixel padding on every side. If that's what you like better, that's totally fine too. That makes your stuff way easier. Check that out. Just like this. That looks kind of nice. So, to wrap up this series here, I'm going to add one little effect that I think nicely finishes up any element that's overlapping another element. I'm going to give them what's known as a box shadow. And if you Google CSS box shadow, it'll take you to a W3 Schools website, the very first one, which gives you an example of what a box shadow might look like. Take this box shadow, and I want you to apply it to your container div. Where's my container? Oh, I put it below. To the container div, and to the unordered list, my navigation. If you do this, look at the box shadow here. Now that doesn't look good, and we're going to change this up, don't worry. If you take a look, here's what box shadow does. It makes it appear slightly elevated off of the screen. You see that? But this is not what we want yet. This does not look very nice. You see that? That box shadow just doesn't fly the way we want it to. It's too dense. It's too intense. We need to alleviate it slightly. We also need a little bit of room on the very, very bottom of the container div. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back into our HTML and our CSS, go to the body, and I want you at the very bottom, give it a padding bottom of 2%. If you do that, the whole body should have a little bit of padding at the bottom, and we should see, did it not work? Oh, you know what? Because this is absolutely positioned, I think we should just give the container some margin bottom. That might be easier, actually. Give the container some margin bottom of 2%. And push it a little bit off the bottom of the page so you can see the box shadow on the bottom. You could say 5% if that feels better. And there. Now we can see that the box shadow is making it appear elevated off the page. But again, the box shadow is way too intense. You notice this? Way too intense. Let's numb it down a little bit. Let me show you how I would do it, okay? So, box shadows can be difficult. And I recommend, thoroughly recommend to everyone that if you want to use box shadow properties right, you Google some great box shadow property examples. Because they're complicated for a beginner, I'm going to paste in a box shadow here. I want you to compare it to the one we had previously for my container. So this right here is my new box shadow. Oops. Now there's actually, you'll see that after the first box shadow I have a little comma. Now they both look the same. One box shadow here and then another box shadow there. See that right there? Now you'll notice that in my first box shadow it was 10 pixels, 10 pixels, 5 pixels, and the color was like a middle of the tier gray. But in my last one, I used a hex color. In my next box shadow, I overwrote it with 0. We start with 0 box shadow. Then 3 pixels, 6 pixels, and an RGBA of white, 0000, or sorry, black, 0000 for all black, but then we made the opacity really, really, really light, 0.16, so it's mostly see-through. And then we made another one that's slightly less see-through right after it, after the comma. This is what that looks like if you, and by the way, do the same thing for the navigation. Take this box shadow and do the same thing with the navigation right here. Overwrite this one with a new box shadow, and this is what it looks like. If you make the page bigger and you refresh, it still looks like it's elevated off the page, but it doesn't look like it's like there's an insane box shadow. There's just a light shadow on the bottom and a light shadow here, so it looks like it's very slightly elevated off the page. That is all fitting within Google material design best practices. So this right there, check us out. We now have our desired website with the hover effects using pseudo selectors, which I breezed over very briefly. We'll talk more about pseudo selectors later, but they can be super useful when applied correctly. We also have some nice little cards that we created here. We have box shadow on our container. We have source links for the source to each of these images. We have a container that overlaps a header with a nice little border bottom with our accent color that we've also used for our links. We have a logo that lines up nicely with our H1 here. And as far as I'm concerned, there's not too much else I would want to add to this page to go over all of the basic fundamental principles you'll need to know about HTML and CSS. Now, if you took the time to read some of my captions, you'll notice that I spend a lot of time on these because I have no life. Hollywood often calls upon this furry critter for over-the-top displays of emotion. The actress hamster is not only cute, but also extremely talented. With the ability to cry on command, the red carpet rodent is held in high esteem by most critics and SAG members. Found mostly foraging for food or starring in YouTube videos in need of some extra awe factor. Yeah, I get it. You're not entertained. I was. This next one. This bat owl is native to Central America and is known for its aggressive nature. Territorial in spirit, these birds have been known to show up at minor league baseball games in the droves and occasionally get signed to lengthy contracts. Also, I was entertained by myself when I wrote that one too. I impress myself way too often, guys. Understand this. The last one, the crest white-striped shark is famously photogenic. One of the more self-conscious beasts of the sea, these magnificent creatures are often found staring at their own reflection or picking debris from their lovely set of pearly whites with a local sea urchin. Scientists recently discovered the secret to their dental hygiene: seaweed floss. No, you're not entertained? Oh, I see a couple smiles. That's all I was hoping for. That makes those hours and hours and hours of writing worth it. Yeah, I spend most of my... You know what I did Saturday night? You already know. So guys, that wraps up this little bootcamp series on HTML and CSS. In the next series, we're going to talk about how to do the same thing, but in about 20 minutes. Now, we spent days, 3 or 4 days, putting this website together, right? But you don't need to. All of that CSS we wrote right here, see all this CSS? We wrote about 122 lines of CSS, and we had to painstakingly go through, delete a bunch of stuff, go through stuff again. There's a much, much easier way to do this. And that's going to be the focus of our next little video tutorials. Okay? So congratulations for walking through this with me. You finished it. I know, take a deep breath. I'm going to paste all this code into Slack. You'll have it. But for now, congratulations. Give yourself a round of applause.